So at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Marilyn Herie. With over 2 decades as a leading administrator, educator, and professional trainer, Dr. Herie brings a passionate focus to inspiring transformational, experiential, and inclusive leadership and learning. She's a member of the International Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers. She has published widely on evidence-based practice approaches, including motivation and positive behavior change. Throughout her 20 plus years of academic teaching and administration, she has mobilized positive leadership and outstanding results and accomplishments across teams and departments, and identified keen insights into the essential strategies that lead to institutional success. She leads through her values of inclusion, compassion, integrity, and joy. Dr. Herie is a social worker by profession and is the former Vice President of Academic and Chief Learning Officer at Centennial College. Welcome, Marilyn.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Sue, for that very generous introduction and welcome to this afternoon's session. I'm super excited because I think motivation is something that organizes all of our interactions and lives, both personal and professional, with respect to ourselves, to our loved ones and our families, as well as our clients and patients. And speaking of clients and patients, I know some of you have patients and some might have clients. I'll use the terms interchangeably, and really appreciating that we have such a robust interprofessional group here this afternoon. I want to start by acknowledging that I'm joining today from Danforth East, Toronto to Toronto, which is a part of Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaties, as well as unceded lands that continue to be contested, and encourage you to also take a moment and acknowledge the lands that you're joining from. And so in terms of our time here until 1 o'clock this afternoon, we're going to start with a couple of polling questions. And those questions will ask about just your prior experience with motivational interviewing and what brought you here this afternoon. And then we're going to jump into our webinar this afternoon. I'll give you an overview of the series because there's 3, as Sue mentioned. So today and then 2 next week. And then a very quick, I promise, like less than 4 minutes, lit review of motivational interviewing evidence, clinical evidence, specifically around stroke rehabilitation. And then we're going to talk about the foundation, the essential fundamentals of motivational interviewing today. And I want to say this is meant to be interactive, informal. Feel free to interrupt or put a question into the chat. If you want to sit back and watch TV, that's totally fine too. So however you want to participate is completely your call. I recognize and respect that this hour and a half is a really precious use of your busy day. So my goal is to make this hour and a half, which you will never get back, of really high value to you. So your feedback along the way and at the end will be also really helpful for me. So this is going to be an intro. We'll have some key takeaways at the end. We'll have one last polling question. And so here we go. So Sue, do you want to throw up the first polling question? So what has been here? So there's 2, perfect. So you can complete both of them. So what's been your prior experience with motivational interviewing? You've heard of it, but this is your first time attending a training. You've attended 1 or more trainings, or you are a seasoned motivational interviewing practitioner. And then you'll see the second question, what made you decide to join this afternoon? I'm sure there are lots of other things that you could be doing with this hour and a half, and maybe you're going to be multitasking, which is totally fine too. Interested in getting some tools or insights to help you with clients that don't follow through or seem motivated to change. Maybe feeling a bit skeptical, like, could this work? Because the clients that you have are highly complex and challenging, not sure, but check it out. And had nothing better to do. So why not? Why not have a webinar and a sandwich? So let's see the results of the first question. Okay. So it looks like for the majority, you've heard of it, but this is your first time attending. You have attended, but you want to learn more and maybe just have a refresh, which is awesome. And it looks like 3%, which might be 1 or 2 folks, are seasoned motivational interviewing practitioners. And so, first of all, the last two of those categories, thank you, because feel free to jump in, to challenge, to ask questions, to also offer your own insights and expertise. So that's amazing. And it looks like there's already capacity within the Northeastern Ontario Stroke Network, which is amazing. And for those of you that it's your first time, I hope it's great. And I'm going to do my very best, like I said, to make this of high value to you. And it looks like well, see, it's very unusual in a Zoom poll that there's like full agreement, interested in getting tools and insights. That's awesome. And what I do promise, and we'll talk more about this throughout this webinar as well as the next two, that I will specifically point to some key things that you can take away right away and use this afternoon or at home tonight with your family. So with that, I'm going to jump into the slides. And sharing screens always feels perilous to me because it's like, am I sharing the right screen? Okay, here we go. So that worked just great. Okay, so
I don't have, oh, there we go. Now we have your slideshow showing.
awesome. Okay, and audio is good, hopefully. And if there's anything, then Sue's just going to interrupt and tell me, or if there's a question or comment in the chat, like I said. So this afternoon, we have our essentials of motivational interviewing, and each of the sessions is going to scaffold onto the next. But if for your colleagues that weren't able to come, that's cool too, because I will do like a very quick review, plus you'll have the video, plus you have the slides. Then next week on February 11th, we're going to talk about evoking change talk to enhance motivation. So one of the very specific skills in motivational interviewing. And then on February 13th, we're going to look at some tools for working with complex clients. So I know that within each of these webinars, there will be some very specific takeaways that are meant to be really practical that you can use right away. And so here we are, the essentials of motivational interviewing. And so, and one of my hobbies is photography. So I hope you like some of the photos that I've sprinkled through the webinar. And so I didn't actually eat this book. This is the Motivational Interviewing textbook. It was published, this fourth edition was published in 2023. Highly recommend it. You got a little snack as the pre-reading. So Guildford Press has a complimentary chapter 1 on the Guildford Press Motivational Interviewing website. And if you sign up, there's also some additional free takeaways. You don't have to purchase the book to access them, but I actually really recommend the book, and I'll be referencing that throughout our 3 webinars. If you have a previous edition of the Motivational Interviewing textbook, this is well worth getting and reading because it demonstrates how this approach has matured since the first edition was published in 1991. And there's continues to be a robust conversation among the MINT or Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers listserv. I probably get like 4 or 5 contributions in my inbox every day. So this really represents kind of the state of the art of motivational interviewing, and that's what you're getting. So if you have attended previous trainings, you might notice some differences, and that reflects kind of where we're at in 2025. So this is a tasting menu. This isn't the whole meal. It is the 3 1.5-hour webinars. So I hope most of all that this certainly gives you some practical tools, but also that this sparks your curiosity to actually dig into this even more, because it's been a rich practice for me, certainly since the mid-90s when I attended my first MI training and practicing as a social worker at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health for close to 20 years, and then on to Centennial College. So it's certainly been a helpful companion on my journey, both as a clinician and an administrator. I would also say as a human being, actually. I think you may find it really resonates with some of your own values and approaches. You'll also see on some of the slides this little yellow star, which is a signal that this is a takeaway. This is something that can be helpful to you in your practice. So I did intentionally put a star next to the Motivational Interviewing book because I really hope that this is something that you dig into after our webinar series. So here's our very quick review of the evidence for motivational interviewing in the context of stroke rehabilitation. And this quote from a landmark article by the WHO in 2011, medicines will not work if you don't take them, sounds really obvious. But what the article points to, and it's open access, highly recommend it, still really relevant, talks about how there's a real gap between the treatment and the outcome. And that gap is called patient follow-through. And so we know that patients don't follow through, whether it's with medication or behavior change or other elements of their treatment plan. And it sounds like from that second polling question that that's what has brought 100% of us here this afternoon. So here's and you'll see in the slides, you have links to the various resources. So this, from the article, from a study that's quoted in the article, talks about just the medications and the decline 2 years post-stroke. And I know you've seen this firsthand, but I think it really starkly portrays that even something as seemingly simple as taking a medication is actually simple but not easy. And then when you add in the many different behavioral interventions that colleagues joining this afternoon are supporting, then it even further adds to the complexity of patient health behavior change. In the article, there's a fair amount given to motivational interviewing as an effective tool. And so there's some review of the literature up to 2011 in relation to MI in stroke rehab and health behavior change. This article from, so this is another article, a randomized controlled trial that fed into that Cochrane review, or sorry, that WHO review. This Cochrane review from 2015 found that participants who received MI were especially impacted in terms of their post-stroke mood 12 months after treatment. And so that was one of the key findings. There were some other findings around health behaviors, or rather post-stroke other health indicators, but these weren't statistically significant in this review. This study did find some statistically significant improvements in health and physical function post-stroke. This was from 2024. And then this article is interesting because it actually talks not so much about patient outcome, but the delivery of motivational interviewing. And what does that look like in the context of stroke rehabilitation? And it found that the effectiveness is related to fidelity in practicing motivational interviewing. And I think that's an important caveat because there's, in the MI literature, there's a lot given to patient outcome, but there's also a very large literature around therapist behavior or clinician behavior change as a result of motivational interviewing. And that axiom that we're on the wrong side of our eyeballs, that self-reportedly, I am practicing motivational interviewing, but if you record and code my session for MI adherence, so to speak, to what extent am I actually practicing it? And so we're no different than our patients. There's also that gap between the treatment and the outcome, if you will. So I think that's something helpful to keep in mind, that it is very much a practice. And like patient change, our own practice evolution is simple but not easy. So I've certainly enjoyed the practice over the past almost 30 years. So what are some of the take-homes? Motivational interviewing is effective, especially in relation to depression and mood, medication adherence, and physical and mental health metrics. That combining motivational interviewing with other evidence-based approaches is probably the best thing. And that's what we're likely to do anyway. That's certainly how I approached this in my clinical practice, combining motivational interviewing, in my case, with cognitive behavioral therapy and solution-focused therapy, which is kind of where the practice was at in the 90s and 2000s. And of course, patients are our best guides, and we'll talk more about that this is an equal partnership. And as always, further research is needed. We got to keep the scientists in business. So I also want to point to this other large piece, which is part of the broader psychological literature, that ambivalence is normal. And I think this is something I hope we can carry through all three of these webinars, that oftentimes we talk about patient resistance or patients not being motivated, and to reframe that as all of us, every person, tends to be ambivalent about change. Because I don't know if anyone on this webinar has made a New Year's resolution this year. For 2025, we know that gyms have a spike in membership, that healthy eating, dry January, all of the great resolutions that folks have. And for many of us, we might have stopped making New Year's resolutions because by February or March or April, it was sort of like, well, what's the point? So ambivalence is normal. Change is a process, not an event. And importantly, ambivalence and motivation are something that can be a product of how we engage with our patients. And so let's hold on to some of those thoughts as we go through our time together. So I'd ask you to bring that beginner's mindset. I don't know about you, but I found, regardless of how many decades, or in this webinar, it might be weeks, if you're brand new to your new job, and congrats and welcome if anyone wants to give a shout out if they just got hired in the last 4 to 6 months, or for colleagues who have been in this role for more than 5 years, shout out to you. More than 10 years, awesome. Anyone more than 20 years, feel free to put a little heart emoji. That regardless of months or years or decades, that I'm sure we all find that you go home at the end of the day and say to your partner, I thought I'd seen it all, but it turns out that I guess I haven't. I certainly found that in my own case. So with that beginner's mind, something that you will take away and experiment with, or a question that you want to think through, something that I've shared that you're thinking, I'm not sure that'll fit within my context or with my patients. I want to think more about that. And maybe a seed that you want to plant later when the season is right. And so with that beginner's mindset, this afternoon, we're going to talk about what motivational interviewing is, a little bit of what it's not, the spirit of motivational interviewing, which is the foundation of motivational interviewing as a way of being with our clients, the 4 foundation skills, and the 4 key tasks. So those are kind of the fundamentals. And then some takeaways and discussion. We'll end with a last polling question. And I also have homework, which is optional, the best kind of homework, but I challenge you to try it. We'll talk more. We'll see where you're at the end of our time. Okay, so let's start with a definition. Motivational interviewing is a particular way of talking with people about change and growth to strengthen their own motivation and commitment. So you notice that it doesn't say motivational interviewing is an evidence-based counseling approach, a manual-based approach. It's all of those things, but at its heart, it's a way of talking with people about change and growth to evoke their own motivation, to bring that out from them, draw it out of them, and fully respecting of patient autonomy and decision-making that some of us, some of our patients, some of our loved ones may take their own time to make decisions to change. And so it's holding that almost paradox that as health practitioners, we are there to support change. That's our mandate. But at the same time, we're working with someone who's in charge of their own life and has that absolute power and authority and autonomy to make those decisions for themselves. And that can be a hard place to hold on to in that moment. We'll come back to this. We can position motivational interviewing along a continuum of different counseling or engagement conversational styles with our clients or patients. A following style is more just being there while someone vents, just being that supportive presence, a witness to another person's pain or difficulty or grief or loss. And as health practitioners, I'm sure that this is an important part of many of the conversations you have, where at that moment, what that person really needs is a supportive presence. That's a following style. A directing style can be in a crisis situation or where there is a clear intervention needed right at that moment. And at that time, people are very appreciative of a directing style. Motivational interviewing is right in the middle, a guiding style. So it has elements of following in the supportive presence, but it also is not directive, but directional. So there is a goal in mind. And this quote from the Motivational Interviewing textbook, I think beautifully articulates this notion of supporting client ownership of the change process. And I love how Dr. Miller, the originator of this approach with his collaborator, Stephen Rolnick, notes that all change is self-change, to which helpers are privileged witnesses and facilitators. And I think that really brings the humility and privilege of being in the work that we are in supporting people through some of the most vulnerable and momentous parts and times of their life. And there are lots of other different words to describe these different styles. I just chose sort of 3. These are also referenced in the book, but it just to give you sort of a snapshot of kind of what does that look like in practice. That more directive style is about conducting tests and running tests and administering interventions and medications. The following style is just allowing that person to be, like being with them. And the guiding style, that accompanying on a journey toward a specific destination, that notion of awakening their own motivation, their own intentions for change, and perhaps pointing to areas of interest, like a good tour guide, that it's not that you are going to force people through a kind of rote, here's exactly how we're going to do it, but that we're going to take this journey together. And we're going to collaboratively identify the goals in terms of where we want to go. Because, and we'll talk about this, there's this notion in motivational interviewing, and probably in your own practice too, that you are 2 equal experts. And that notion of a working alliance as being so key to patient outcome. That without that working alliance, and this is true across all different modes of clinical practice, that the working alliance is foundational to patient outcome. So what is motivational interviewing not? It's not just being nice to people. There is a method and a complexity to the approach. Now, a tool to tuck away into your toolkit. There are going to be tools that I will share that you can absolutely tuck away into your toolkit. But the caveat is that they won't be that effective unless they're offered in the spirit of motivational interviewing as a way of being with your patient. So that's why that's a way, sort of a what am I is not piece, a panacea. So we all were here to talk about some additional ways to support intrinsic motivation for change, but motivational interviewing isn't the only way, necessarily even the best way. Those 3 styles, conversational or counseling styles, are all equally valid, depending on where the person is at and what they need. So motivational interviewing is one of many approaches that you can decide when this approach could be most helpful. And the beauty of it is your patients are your best guide on that, because you will get immediate feedback. And in a few minutes, I will point to some very key feedback that you may get from your patients that will suggest to you that perhaps motivational interviewing might be the intervention to try at that moment. Often in the past, motivational interviewing has been equated with the stages of change theory, Prochaska and De Clemente's trans-theoretical model. They're not the same. They were kind of born at the same time. And what did Bill Miller call them? Kissing cousins that never got married. But so they're complementary, but not the same. And motivational interviewing is not a way of getting people to do what you want them to do. That that's sort of counter to the spirit of motivational interviewing, which I will talk about in a moment. So here we are. So I have never known a highly evidence-based practice approach in which the originator of that approach, Bill Miller, talks about the spirit as being more important than the technique. And so I hope that that's one of the things that really shines through from our time together this afternoon and next week, and through your further exploration of motivational interviewing, is that what I'm going to share around the spirit of MI may seem to you to be like, well, obvi, like, why are we even talking about this? This is table stakes. But like all aspects of change, and certainly all aspects I've found in motivational interviewing, it is simple but not easy. So with that caveat, let me ask this question. Who was your favorite teacher? So would anyone like to raise your hand or put in the chat who was your favorite teacher in the world who you want to just give a shout out to? So I will just pause for a moment. Would anyone like to share something about your favorite teacher? It could be someone from elementary school, high school. Anybody feeling brave, like unmuting? This is the awkward Zoom silence moment.
Come on, boys and girls. Brooke, would you like to tell us?
Awesome. Thank you, Brooke. Thank you. Thank you.
No problem. My favorite teacher was Mr. Lack. He was my high school history teacher. And yeah, he was just fantastic. He made history come to life, and that's what I really liked about it. It was very engaging.
That's awesome. Thank you. And thank you so much for speaking up, Brooke. So can I ask you, Mr. Lack from high school, which I'm assuming wasn't last year, even though you look fabulous and could well be out of high school. What was the vibe in the classroom with Mr. Lack? Like, what did students say about him?
Mhm. He had very expressive eyebrows, and when he would get really revved up about a certain topic, his eyebrows would start going. So everybody just loved, like, okay, we're really getting into it. Like you could see his excitement, and he was always right there with you. Like if there was something that you didn't understand, or if we had questions, he was more than happy to go off topic with us because he was more concerned with connecting with what was important to us, like, tell us more about Alexander the Great's horse Bucephalus and how he tamed him and why did that happen. And we would go off on a tangent because it was interesting, and he connected to what was important to us and not just, okay, we have to get through this material.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that, Brooke. And shout out to Mr. Lack and all of the Mr. and Ms. Lacks in our lives as teachers, amazing teachers. Some of you may be thinking about someone from kindergarten or grade 3, some of you high school or college or university, or maybe someone else in your life who was an incredible mentor to you and guide. And Brooke, what you shared about Mr. Lack is also so emblematic of the spirit of motivational interviewing. And you notice there's this little star here because this is something we want to reference and think about as we engage with patients. Hearing that he was someone whose excitement and interest and engagement with that class were so clear and palpable that when the eyebrows started to go, he was fully present, 100% present with the class. And also hearing that he was willing to just jump onto a tangent because he was walking alongside. He was so interested in what the students were interested in, what that class was interested in. You also mentioned that nobody felt bad about not understanding, that in fact he wanted to generously engage. And that's only possible. Like, I don't know if we've thought about teachers or maybe bosses where it was like, I don't think I want to ask a question because I feel like I might be judged if for not knowing. Like I want to show my best, most perfect self. And hearing that in a classroom environment or a work environment where we don't have to be our perfect, amazing selves, that we can ask questions because we know that person is really most interested in us. All of those qualities, you beautifully, Brooke, encapsulated the spirit of motivational interviewing. That's what we're talking about here. Partnership, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment. So partnership, you and the client are two equal experts. And I heard that implicit in what you said, that there was such respect for what the students in that high school class brought, regardless of how little or much they knew about history. That really came through in how you shared. Also, acceptance, like that notion of absolute worth and accurate empathy. Not just empathy, but accurate empathy, really hearing and seeing where people were at, what they needed at that moment, and affirming autonomy, that it's not just about what that teacher wanted to do, it was what the students wanted to, that they had choices to make too, and had input into what got talked about in that classroom. Compassion, which is about the absolute focus on the other, that very best interests of the other person, and empowerment, which is not so much because there's two ways of thinking about empowerment. One is sort of giving power to someone, which like we can't give, people have power inherently. So the way empowerment is used in the spirit of motivational interviewing is this notion of drawing out, realizing and utilizing their own skills and abilities that are already there, that already exist. And so all of these four elements that we heard in Mr. Lack's amazing teaching, I don't know if he's still a teacher, but we know that there's lots of favorite teachers in the world, and we take our hats off to them. That there are also clinicians, and I think in this web space too, in this online space, also embodying that spirit of motivational interviewing. And so if we have that in our mind, those four kind of key things, let me do this little thought experiment with you. So if you think about something that you've been considering changing, but you're feeling ambivalent about it. So in my case, like my mother before me, I recently got a bone density scan and learned, much to my dismay, that I have early onset osteoporosis. So no need for medication yet, but saw the endocrinologist, and she gave me a list of things that I needed to do. And she was like, but Marilyn, you have to keep your strength. Like, you lose strength every year. So you need to wear a weighted vest. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a weighted vest, and walk 10 minutes a day, and preferably join a gym, do strength training. So I learned this in November, and I have been thinking about joining a gym, but I haven't done it yet. And part of it is, but I'm very much like, I probably will do it, like, but I'm ambivalent. Driving to it, where do I park, etc. So is there something in your own life as well that you're ambivalent about? And you can also extend that to, are you currently in a relationship where maybe there's some change that could be made by your loved one, or perhaps have a child or a partner's child who, it may be adult or not, who could also be doing some things differently. And so as we think about these strategies for how we actually support the person to change, let's put ourselves in that role of how we're experiencing this. So when someone tells us why we should make this change, tells us why it's important, why we should do it. Like my doctor told me, like all the reasons why, then going even further, like putting that little bit of pressure on, well, here, let me tell you how you could do this, and emphasize how important it is. And if you meet resistance, repeat the above. Have any of us had those conversations? I'll just like let that sink in. I certainly have. My partner is super messy. Like, you know, the Peanuts character, I forget his name, but there was like a cloud of dust that
That would be Linus.
Linus, thank you.
Mhm.
That was like, no, Pigpen. Linus had the blanket, I think.
You're right. You're right. It's
I don't know. It can't, but okay, anyway. But had like this cut. Anyway, that's my story for partner will probably never see this webinar. But anyway, and I'm quite a neat person, like so you can see like this is like here the conversations can unfold. And in a way, we come to these conversations often with our patients as well. In my case, with clients that I worked with, and also occasionally with faculty or maybe the odd dean, because it's really important to make this change. We want people to be successful. So this actually, counterintuitively, is how to mobilize disengagement in people who are ambivalent about change. For people who have already made up their mind, all of these interventions can be super helpful. They may be asking you for how to go about it. They may be asking you for more information. But when people are ambivalent, this isn't a motivational conversation. In fact, it can lead to the opposite. And in my case with my doctor, we didn't have this conversation. In fact, she was super low key. It was like, it really is up to you how you go about this. And there was a sense of, I really care, but it's for you to decide. And that empowers me to kind of figure out in this phase where I'm at of what will make the most sense to me, that I will do some kind of strength training. I'm trying to figure out what will make the most sense. Might be joining a gym, might be buying some weights. It might be the weighted vest off Amazon, if I can find one with good reviews. So where does this come from? It comes from our fixing reflex, which is like all of our reflexive actions are reflexes. We can't always control them. I know for myself with 2 adult stepchildren and an adult daughter, that when something isn't quite going great for them, I want to jump in right away with advice. And, well, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Well, what about this? Well, you really should, handle. And often the response is, well, yeah, I've already thought about that. Yes, I know. Yes, mom. Okay. Like the most trigger of my fixing reflex is when my daughter talks about something to do with work. Like I have been an academic administrator for a long time, and I feel like I have some expertise to offer in how to navigate relationships with bosses and organizational structures. And I just go right there. And she shuts me down every time because it's not helpful, not equal partnership, right? Not collaborative, not affirming of her own autonomy. So this is the key takeaway for feedback from your patients or loved ones of when you might want to try a more motivational style. That when you hear someone say to you, yes, but that's a sign that maybe your fixing reflex has been activated. And so one of the things I'll ask you to listen for in the next week or so until we meet again next Tuesday is in your personal life, in your professional life, where do you hear those yes buts from someone you're in conversation with? And to just have that awareness and notice it. Just notice it. And we're going to talk more about it next time when we talk about evoking change talk. But for now, let's just notice that yes, but, and equating that to our fixing reflex. And while we're on the subject of the fixing reflex, what are some other traps to avoid? And I put this picture, it's not my broken cell phone, knock on wood, that it's not ever, is because like, it's like a fixing, like, oh my God, your phone broke. What can we do? So what are these 4 other traps? The expert trap, which is related to the fixing reflex, where it's like, I need to have the answer. I'm the expert here. But from that motivational perspective, yes, we have lots of expertise, but so does that person sitting across from us. They have lots of expertise too in their life. And so does their community and their family. There's lots of expertise there. The persuasion trap, which is kind of what we saw in those 4 interventions, right? Explaining why the person should change, persuading them. The time trap, which is an interesting one. A colleague of mine from CAMH famously said, and I don't know if he was the one that made it up, but I've never forgotten it, was that if you act like you have only 5 minutes, it will take you all day. If you act like you have all day, it will take you 5 minutes. And that has reverberated through so many encounters, conversations, and meetings that in those moments where I really can't control or manage my own time anxiety because there's so much going on, that it ends up being that conversation that leads to another conversation that leads to a further conversation. The times when I am able to just manage that and really be fully present, it's amazingly efficient. So that's an element in motivational interviewing, is that presence and that spirit of MI. And the wandering trap is that notion of motivational interviewing as directional, but not directive, but is directional. So it's not just about kind of venting, and people often do wander onto side tracks, etc. That with, like in Mr. Lack's case, I think it's a perfect example because he did digress, but he finished the class. I believe, Brooke, he did get through the curriculum, right? So there was within that structure space to hold autonomy and co-creation of what that encounter looks like, but also an eye on the end game. So which are more challenging? And, I think in that spirit of simple but not easy, that part of it depends on kind of how I wake up that morning. Part of it depends on who I'm with. There are some patients, like we are human beings, right? And I'm sure you have some patients that you could be BFFs outside of the patient encounter if you've met them under different circumstances. They vibe with you. Like you really get them and they get you and you get along great. And like all human beings, there may be others in your practice that you think to yourself, if they were to miss or reschedule the appointment, I wouldn't be heartbroken because they're really difficult. And so I think part of the simple but not easy element of motivational interviewing spirit, and one that I continue to learn and relearn, is that ability to hold all of those dimensions: partnership, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment with that person in that moment, in that encounter, regardless of how busy I am, of what else has happened, either in my personal life, my professional life, or what's next, and regardless of who is there with me and what they bring, some making it easier and some making it more challenging. And so I think it's important to name this because we as human beings, we bring ourselves and our own leadership to these roles in our clinical practice. And we're going to have a little brief pause for any questions or reflections, but I wanted to highlight this quote from a book that I'm reading right now that a colleague in the hospitality industry recommended to me. But it's really a leadership book called Setting the Table. Danny Meyer is the one who started the famous chain called Shake Shack, which has like lineups around you might have heard, and Union Square, like these famous New York restaurants that have become global brands, and talks about the distinction between service and hospitality, which I think beautifully maps onto practice. It shows that regardless of our occupation or discipline, that these concepts of leadership and service are not unique to healthcare or allied healthcare. That notion of service is the technical delivery, and hospitality is how the delivery makes the recipient feel. You can see those, how that really resonates with what we're talking about here in MI. Service is a monologue. We decide how we want to do things. We set our own standards, and we do that in healthcare. But hospitality, as that complement, is the dialogue. To be on the guest side requires listening to that person with every sense. And it takes both service and hospitality to rise to the top. So he attributes the success of his restaurant empire to bringing that hospitality focus, that it's not actually the service is important, but what's more important is the hospitality. And it reminded me so much of how Dr. Miller talked about how the spirit of motivational interviewing is more important than the techniques. So with that, let's pause and see if there's any questions in the chat or comments around thoughts or reflections or questions. Anything so far that you want to take away or experiment with? Anything you want to think through or question you want to ask? Something that maybe you think, not sure if that's really relevant now, but might look back. Sue, is there anything that anyone...
Yeah, there's nothing in the chat yet. I'll give people a minute to type in. I would love if you could give me an example of the wandering trap again. I kind of missed that little piece, and so I'd like to
Totally.
hear something
Yes.
specific about it, maybe a scenario or something.
Yeah, so I think a good example of the wandering trap is when you come to the session and say, what would be like an example of a focus in maybe talking about has the person followed through with the rehab exercises that have been asked
Yeah,
between
so you might, as a physio, give some exercises for an outpatient to do at home to improve their balance and stroke. And
exactly. So in that context, that patient might come really not very interested in talking about anything much to do with their physio, but because they haven't been able to reach their specialist or some other practitioner related to their stroke rehab, is using this appointment as an opportunity to talk about their medication or to talk about some other aspect that maybe the social worker case management could be helping with. And so I think the skillfulness of the wandering trap is the ability to respectfully hear and affirm and acknowledge what that person is bringing, while also kind of gently guiding the conversation to the focus of that appointment, if you will. Because I think, and part of one of the tips, I guess, or strategies to help with that may be to almost inoculate against the wandering trap at the beginning of the session. So one thing that I found helpful, like in my more recent past, it would be like the vice president academic doesn't meet lots of students in person, but when I do, could be a really long conversation and a really difficult one because these are people that no one else has been able to deal with. They've already been through the faculty, the chair, the dean, the associate vice president. Now it's like, the next stop is the president's office, and we don't want that to happen. And so in those instances, I would start the conversation by saying, thank you so much for making the time to be here. We have about 45 minutes. And what I'd love to know is what would be for you the best use of these 45 minutes together with me? What do you hope is going to happen at the end of this time? That gets it all out at the front end, but it also puts it in the context of time. Now, sometimes that 45 minutes turns into an hour and a half, but it doesn't and has never and will never turn into 3 hours, which I have had colleagues experience. And so I think it's just about setting that stage. It's very patient-centered, if you will, but it also acknowledges that we do have equal partners. It's not just that person's agenda. We have 2 agendas. That would give me an opportunity to say, can I also add something that I'm hoping that we can cover today? And then that introduces kind of my agenda into it. And then we negotiate how we're going to address, like it's almost like setting an agenda for the meeting.
Very good. And when you say patient-centered care, we talk about that all the time in our systems of care and stroke. And so it's something I'm thinking about as we go through all this information. Where is this patient-centered care? How does this relate to patient-centered care? Sometimes when you speak, I'm thinking that you're talking about patient-centered care because I'm asking the patient, what do you want to work on and how do you think you can achieve that? And so I think about that term, and I'm going to be thinking about it as you continue to go through your session today and next week.
Thank you. Thank you for framing it as well in the context of patient-centered care, Sue, because I know that's something that all hospitals and health networks really strive towards. And I say strive because it's a continuing practice. It's never perfect. Will never be perfect because it is that complex interplay of so many different needs, systems, structures from the micro right through to the macro level. But that notion of the coherence between motivational interviewing and other modes of practice and concepts like patient-centered care, that maybe motivational interviewing is is a way of many ways to operationalize what that looks like in practice.
I think that would be great because for me, patient-centered care can become a buzzword. And we say it and it's in our policies, but I'm not sure we're really good at practicing it. And maybe motivational interviewing will help us with that.
Thank you. Thanks for
Mhm.
that.
So there's nothing
Um,
to chat if you want to
all
carry
right,
on.
so we shall press onwards. Okay, so now we're at sort of the latter two parts of the webinar that I'll work through with you just again to lay this foundation, and then we'll have some time for some questions at the end and our last polling question in this last 35 minutes or so. So the four foundation skills of motivational interviewing, the acronym OARS, are used that many of you, it sounds like those of you who've already been part of MI training or familiar with this have probably already seen. So I'm sure this looks really familiar to you. Open questions, affirming, reflecting, and summarizing. And so I just want to run through some examples and a couple of little tools or takeaways for these. And we'll be talking more about these next week. So open questions, I think, are pretty self-explanatory. The motivational elements to those are bringing that spirit of curiosity. So that notion of the spirit of motivational interviewing, like I don't know the answer to this question. I'm open to what you are going to tell me. I am 100% present. Like Mr. Lack, like I really want to know this. Sometimes I think when I reflect on like the super busy days in clinical practice when the appointments are scheduled one after the other, and it's like, how can I help you today? It can almost be a little bit rote. I'm just saying for me. And as the person is talking sometimes, especially if they get a little bit off track, I might also be mentally multitasking a little bit because there's lots of things going on. So simple but not easy. So that notion of asking an open question with real curiosity and undivided attention in what that person is going to say, that's the gift. Maybe that's the kind of relearning and sometimes unlearning for me that I continue to. And in my personal life too, like right now, my partner is visiting his sister in Fresno in California, and like called me FaceTime the other day, yesterday, and I was right in the middle of just putting together some stuff for my taxes. I like to get ahead of it. I was just like collating things and I confess I was totally multitasking at the beginning of that conversation. Then I realized like that is so rude because I haven't seen him for several days. And even though maybe what he was talking about wasn't all that exciting about where they went for dinner, etc., but it's like, so all to say, I share that with vulnerability and humility to say that bringing that absolute curiosity and presence, undivided attention, regardless of what else is happening, simple but not easy. And then after that open question, following up with reflections, and we'll talk about reflections in a second, to avoid the expert trap, the question and answer trap. I will ask a lot of questions. You will answer the questions. And then at the end, as the expert, I will have an answer for you. So that's sort of antithetical to MI. In this lovely article that Stephen Rolnick, the collaborator with Bill Miller on the MI textbook, wrote in 2010, I think it was the British Medical Journal, top 10 motivational interviewing open questions. And so maybe one of the takeaways for you is to reflect on, are there questions that you don't typically ask? Or ones that you used to ask, but yet, sometimes we cycle between questions we ask. And do you see any questions here that might be helpful to you with a challenging patient or client that you're working with. You'll notice there's something special about these questions, that almost all of them evoke change talk. And that's a little commercial for the next webinar. We will talk more about change talk. The second of those foundation skills is affirming. And affirming is different than reflecting back to a client. We'll talk about reflecting next. But affirming is really tuning into the attributes, the qualities, the strengths, something that that person is bringing that's inherent in what you're seeing, and naming it, acknowledging it to them, affirming it to them. And in motivational interviewing, there are two kinds of affirmations, both amazing, both great. Like, not one complex isn't necessarily better than a simple affirmation. Simple affirmation is a specific or quality. So in the example here, you saw the warning signs and you took action, is a way of naming what that person did, an action that they took, something specific. Or an enduring strength. For example, what you did took real courage. It took a lot for you to come in today, a simple affirmation. You're someone who really follows through no matter what, a complex affirmation. Affirmations in the most recent edition of the Motivational Interviewing textbook are talked about as actually an emerging area of research, as potentially an underappreciated aspect of ways of engaging with patients that can really impact outcome. So stay tuned, because I think the coming years we'll see more research specifically on the role that affirmations play in a motivational interviewing encounter as related to patient segment of a clinical conversation, like a conversation with our client, and we were to code for the number of questions asked and the number of reflections, what would we find? I don't know, but if you wanted to, you could, with the patient's permission, take a 5-minute recording and then code it yourself, or take it to clinical supervision and code it with your supervisor. Like, where I'm going with this is that for the majority of people, reflections are not the reflex, are not the default. Questions come much more easily than reflective statements. Reflections are statements, questions are questions. They're very different. And so I think one of the most, for me, challenging things in the first, I'm going to say 5 years of practicing motivational interviewing, was to practice reflective listening so much that it became as accessible to me as asking a question. That doesn't happen overnight, but it's absolutely achievable. And it's really powerful, because reflections communicate understanding. They build alliance, working alliance, therapeutic alliance, more efficiently than asking questions. Questions communicate, I don't know, so I'm asking. Reflections communicate, and even though they are hypotheses, educated guesses, they communicate understanding. So reflections are not to be underestimated. In fact, of all of these 4 skills, reflective listening, probably the most powerful. So that deep listening, accurate empathy, really a test of not just our empathy, but accurate empathy, and temporarily just like foregoing those roadblocks to listening, like agreeing or disagreeing with the person, or telling them, giving advice, cautioning, persuading, reassuring, all of those aspects which aren't so much part of the motivational interviewing repertoire. So let me give some examples. So a simple reflection is more or less not repeating the same words. Sometimes it can be that, although that can be a little bit annoying to the person, but just rephrasing back what you hear. So in this case, the patient is saying, it's not like I'm avoiding people, I'm tired all the time and the pain is really bad. So this is in relation to kind of social outcomes and getting like actually relationship impacts to that stroke. So a simple reflection could be, it's making it really hard to get moving and active again. So just you see that rephrasing of what the person has said. A complex reflection goes under the surface. So if you think about an iceberg, the tip of the iceberg is what the person has said. Underneath the surface are the unspoken meaning behind what's said. And a complex reflection doesn't have to be complicated, doesn't have to be long, but it's drawing from under the surface. And it's drawing that from our maybe knowing or being with that person, but also perhaps from the many hundreds, perhaps thousands of other conversations we've had with people in a similar situation. So these are hypotheses, they're educated guesses. They're not putting words in the person's mouth, and they're genuinely offered as I want to understand. So the complex reflection may be the pain and fatigue are affecting your relationships. Do you see how each of these reflections takes the conversation in a different way? And that's the art of motivational interviewing, is that through reflective listening, you can very artfully guide the conversation in different directions and perhaps deeper directions more quickly than you might otherwise be able to achieve. And that's relevant because in our current healthcare context, where time is of the essence, we don't have unlimited time with patients or clients. And so we want to be able to get to kind of the heart of what the issues are as efficiently as possible, really be able to be there with that person, support them where they need it most. And so that the second one, the complex reflection, may be right or wrong, but I will say what I've never heard from a client in offering a complex reflection is, how dare you say that? That is completely wrong. That in fact, what the person may say, it's more of like a clarifying for themselves and to me. So they may absolutely agree. Yes, and it's really been hard, especially with my wife. Like I'm even avoiding her. Or it may be, well, it's not so much that it's affecting my relationships. I have this amazing family and support system. It's just that I'm feeling like kind of a loser because I've lost so much. And I used to be such a social person. So you see, wherever that conversation is going to go, it's deepening. They're offering more information to us. And that's deepening our relationship too in that working alliance. Reflections are not questions. So I just want to underline this. Do you hear the difference? It's making it really hard to get moving and active again. It's making it really hard to get moving and active again. So do you hear how your voice goes up or down at the end? So that's the other thing, is often the kind of beginning MI forming reflections makes it into a question, even though it's an amazing, beautiful reflection. So maybe one of the things to pay attention to is, do you ask lots of questions? Do you default to advice or reassurance or praise? Like, what are sort of the comfortable spaces of practice for you in these conversations? And where are those areas for a little bit of stretch and growth? Just step outside the comfort zone a little bit. Pain and fatigue are affecting your relationships? That is a question. It's a fair question, but offering it as a reflection, the pain and fatigue are affecting your relationships, is more powerful because it communicates, I am here with you. I understand. And even if I don't have it fully right, the person listening is going to correct me. They're going to not so much correct as clarify, deepen. So this is some potential takeaway, hands-on practice for your reflection. And if we have time at the end in the Q&A, we can engage with some of these. But here's some prompts for you to maybe think about on your drive home tonight, or perhaps as you're making dinner, to think about, what would I say in reflection to this? I'm not sure I can realistically make all these changes you're asking me to do. I know I haven't been attending my appointments. It's been really hard at home. These exercises aren't working for me. I just need some better medication. It's like, so what would you say? What would be a simple reflection? What would be a complex reflection? And we can debrief some of that too next time. One of the MI practice targets is to aim for at least twice as many reflections as questions in your conversations. And that avoids that expert trap, that question and answer trap. Now, what about patients with receptive or expressive aphasia? And this is something that a couple of colleagues brought up with Sue, that they have taken motivational interviewing training, weren't sure how relatable that was for the many patients that you have with aphasia. And so there is a study that in the literature around MI with post-stroke aphasia. It was a more qualitative, small-scale feasibility study. In that article, there are some adaptations that were done that were found to be effective. Visual cues, rating scales, different ways of modifying reflections, verbally or non-verbally, and then that notion of tailoring the sessions, which we would always want to do. So I think that's a ray of hope and perhaps sunshine on that. But also what I did want to do, because it sounds like SCA is also a very widely used approach for people with receptive and expressive aphasia. And so how can that, because we know, I think one of the takeaways that I offered when we did our lightning fast literature review of motivational interviewing was that MI is often best in combination with other approaches. So how could MI work well in combination with SCA for patients with aphasia? So these are some of the, I think, accepted, and please correct me, I am not an expert in SCA. So if there's anything that I'm missing or incorrect, but that adult tone, the allowing time, being patient, short and simple sentences, being very expressive, intonation, pointing, gestures, pictures, keywords, and that observing the client's expression that they may not be articulating and offering choices. And so I think that there is quite a beautiful actually mapping of the two equal experts, right? Spirit of motivational interviewing. These other aspects of SCA are that notion of the client's needs as being paramount and walking alongside. And we talked about the time trap as being something to be wary of. And then observing the client's expression, unexpressed emotion, accurate empathy, right, that we've just talked about, and offering choices is really about autonomy support. They are the expert in their life. This is for them to make decisions about. And then in terms of expressive aphasia, again, showing patience, so two equal experts, offering communications aids. The client's needs are paramount, walking alongside. We talked about accurate empathy and the importance of saying, I know you know. Affirming, right? Affirming to that. We just talked about affirmations and how powerful, perhaps underappreciated they are. I found it really interesting that saying, I know you know, is such an important element in SCA. And then reflect and summarize are also two of the oars in motivational interviewing. So I hope that's helpful as just, but again, you are the experts in this, both SCA working with stroke rehab patients and also adapting motivational interviewing. So as we engage in our webinars, I would love to hear aspects that you found to be helpful or maybe less helpful, cautionary tales, traps to avoid that you found as well. In terms of summaries, these are ways of kind of just bringing together what we've heard. They can continue the conversation, or they can transition to a new topic, or they can help wrap up a session. And we're going to talk more about summaries in webinar 2. So I hope there were some few little takeaways from this part. Remember the reflective or the client statements for you to consider. So maybe you'll come up with some reflective statements in your spare time. So the last part that I wanted to cover in the next 5 minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions, are the 4 tasks in motivational interviewing. And these are recursive, meaning that they build on each other, but we also go up and down the stairs with ease. So engaging is the first task, and that's the essential foundation. That's the working alliance. And we've been talking a lot about engaging in this webinar, especially with the emphasis I placed on the spirit of motivational interviewing, just being there with that person. Once we've engaged, we can focus on specific goals. And we're going to focus on goals and some tools for doing that in webinar 3, tools for working with complex clients. So please stay tuned for that. But I think the key in this is you can't really focus on goals with a person until you've engaged with them. You have to have the engagement. The engagement, it underlines everything else. And then once you've focused on goals, then we want to evoke change talk, because just articulating a goal doesn't mean that that goal gets accomplished. And that goes back to where I started, full circle, that WHO and Cochrane review around medications don't work unless you take them. So the evoking task is to bridge that gap between the treatment and the outcome. And once that person is ready to make a change, is actually ready to go to work towards that goal, they themselves are going to work towards it, then we work on the planning task of motivational interviewing. But it's not like, okay, engage, check, on to goals, check, on to evoking, check, now we're going to plan, check, problem solved. That oftentimes we have to go back down the little stairs, right? Sometimes planning falls apart because maybe ambivalence rears its head again. Or maybe the goals that we thought we had agreed on, there's been a change. Life gets in the way. Or maybe we need to go back and re-engage. Maybe we need to check in and just sort of see where that person is at. So the ways that Dr. Miller frames these 4 tasks are, can we walk together? Where are we going? Why would you go there? And how will you get there? And I think those are lovely. As Miller and Rolnick put it in their book, it's simplicity on the other side of complexity. And one of the things I love about the 4th edition is that with intentionality, they could have made it like super complicated because there's been thousands and tens of thousands of research articles and things about MI they could have thrown in there, that they opted for simplicity on the other side of complexity. And so it's so readable, it's so companionable, really just a practice guide, like there's lots in there. So just to summarize the 4 tasks, we want to, in engaging, resist the fixing reflex and use our auras to just listen and understand. Where's that person at? Can we walk together? In the focusing tasks, we're going to use auras to align on 1 or more collaborative goals. And we'll talk about that more in webinar 3. Where are we going? So motivational interviewing is directional, not directive, but it is directional. And then in the evoking task, we're going to be listening for change talk, and we're going to use auras specifically to invite, respond, strengthen change talk. So it's all about change talk next Tuesday. You don't want to miss it. It's going to change everything. It's like, that is a big light bulb moment for me when I really just understood the power of selectively evoking change talk. So I don't want to raise expectations too much, but it will be amazing. Why would you go there? Because that's what brought us to this webinar, right? Is evoking motivation for change. And then in the planning task, using auras to collaboratively formulate a plan for change. So what I've put together, I can't tell you how many hours, like this took a really long time. So I really hope you love this practice guide. And it might be annoying to see it blanked out. So there you have the whole thing, all 3 webinars right there in your slides. But we have in this webinar talked about the spirit, the 4 key tasks, and our auras. And next time we're going to talk about change talk and evoking, and then we'll talk about some other specific tools in working with your complex patients. So this is the homework, and we had 4 ways to mobilize disengagement. I didn't want to leave it in that way, and so I invite you to take up this challenge. Maybe it's at home tonight or on the weekend, or maybe it's with a client. And these are 4 questions to evoke change talk. So this will help bridge us into session 2. Say this homework is optional, but it can build relationships. So if you wanted to use it with a loved one, I kind of recommend it, but you decide. So you're going to ask, why would you want to make this change? How might you go about it in order to succeed? Like, again, no fixing reflex, no advice is allowed. You're not going to, like, people might be a little suspicious when you start asking about this. So you've got to really come with your best spirit of MI. How important is it? And then why are you at 4 and not 0? Like, not with judgment, with curiosity, right? And then just give a summary and ask, so what do you think you'll do? And then the conversation's over. Not allowed to give any advice. For this exercise, we will talk about giving advice in webinar number 3. So we'll see. So I hope there was something you'll experiment with, a question or more that you want to think through, some seeds to plant. Thank you for your time this afternoon. We have a few minutes for questions. We will be on Tuesday talking about change talk, and that's that. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Sue, we can have some questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was really great, really interesting. I'm so thrilled that you included supported conversation and people with aphasia in your talk, like I had sent some information to you on. It's really makes it relevant for people at our end. So thanks for the work that you did with that. I appreciate it. 2 things I want to remind people. If you're watching this as a group, please put all the names in the chat so we know who's attended. And the next session is on next Tuesday at same time, 11:30 to 1. If you have any comments or questions, just put them in the chat or raise your hand if you would like to say something. One of our chat people, Krista, said, thank you very much. Amazing resources and presentation. You've inspired a very tired provider. Now, I think I should not use that descriptive word for what I do.
That makes my day. I'm gonna do hard emo. Thank you. That really makes my day. And I hope that because we like the amount on your plate is so massive and the responsibility can be crushing. I hope that motivational interviewing is actually a way of helping alleviate potential burnout, because it really can feel like it's up to us to change for that person. So thank you for reflecting that. That's awesome.
Great, thank you. I wanted to make a comment for myself and some of my experiences. I find reflection can be hard because you're listening, but then you're trying to form your next statement or your next thought or your next question. So it's really hard to be fully present when you have an hour of therapy and they're speaking and you're thinking of all the next steps. So, any tips or tricks around that?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you brought that up, Sue, because that was exactly my struggle. And at the time that I was learning motivational interviewing, I was practicing mainly in groups. I did see clients individually, but mainly relapse prevention groups. And so there would be, 12 or 15 patients in the groups with all the group dynamics. And Lawrence Schulman famously talks about the 2 clients, the client and the group, and that along with everything else, managing time, etc. So distracting, so stressful. At the beginning, my goal was that I would offer 3 reflections in that 90-minute group. And that was it, like just 3 times. So, because I knew like it did not come naturally to me at all. And it's like scaffolding. So maybe it's, 2 or 3 reflections in a conversation and just trying it out. And I guess the other tip I have is giving yourself permission to offer a complex reflection, because I think we often censor ourselves like, oh, I can't, that's an assumption, like I don't want to overstep or whatever. But you, as a clinician, if you're truly there in that spirit of motivational interviewing, of collaboration, like equal partnership and acceptance of the person's autonomy and empowerment and compassion, and you're offering it from that place with your clinical experience and your human experience, that will not go awry. Like, I just want to reassure. So give yourself permission to try it out. And if it feels really scary, you could also try it out with your family at home, just to get your feet under you in practicing offering reflections. It builds relationships. People don't really notice you're even doing it. In fact, it just feels really engaging. Like, it's so much more conversational than asking questions or offering advice or talk. Like, in our conversations with like people in our circle, personal circle, often like someone will say something and I'll think to myself, like, now I want to say, talk about my experience with that, but really they kind of want to talk about their own experience. And so it's almost that pause. Okay, so how do I give them space to talk about their own experience? Reflective listening really does that. And as that conversation unfolds, it also opens up space for them, I'm talking about our personal lives now, to want to hear about your experience. So it's quite lovely, actually. It's very reciprocal and respectful and well worth the little bit of sweat of practicing something that's a little bit different. So yeah, I think it is. I can easily default to reflective listening, but I'm constantly unlearning and relearning, because depending on how I show up or who's there or the triggers of the conversation, like, the fixing reflex is real. It never goes away, or at least it never has for me. So it's a practice. That's why it's the practice of motivational interviewing.
Right. I agree that practicing is in it. I think of sometimes people when they reflect back to me, they sound a bit snobby or a bit know-it-all, just in the way that they're expressing it. So, Sue, what you're saying is, and I
Yes.
kind of get my back up a little bit.
Yes. And so let's just snip that off the front end. What I hear you saying, Sue, what I hear you saying is, like, that is so stop. This is about just naming it. Like, so looking at and that's the practice, is what's under the iceberg. Just say it, because they probably didn't say it. If it's a complex reflection, they didn't say it. So it's simply what you are. It's your educated guess. It's your hypothesis. And there's a couple, actually more than a couple, of amazing chapters with lots of sample conversations in the motivational interviewing textbook. And there's also many motivational interviewing videos online. If you just search, and some of them are my own videos from the years ago. If you want to see young Marilyn, you can just search Marilyn Herie motivational interviewing. And I guarantee no. But anyway, yeah, all to say,
Yeah,
and that also shows it in practice.
yeah, good advice. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue.
Anybody else? Does anyone want to unmute and ask a question or make a statement? I just see our friends in Hornpain and I think how cold it must be there today. It's cold enough in Sudbury. Anybody else?
Well, people, maybe it is a while to be at the computer, and I'm sure folks have other things at the computer. Sue, thank you for your dialogue, and colleagues. Maybe this broke the ice or at least cracked it a little bit. So next time, come with some, like, I hope you try the homework. Oh, we have a polling question. Why don't we answer their polling question? Awesome.
Here we go.
How likely is it that you will actually try the homework assignment? Very likely. I'm curious to give this a try. Maybe if I think of it, I probably would do it. Very unlikely. I am way too busy. Don't pressure me with your homework. So let's see where people are at. Just test the waters.
So maybe people could jot down a few thoughts when they do it so they can maybe share a bit of that next week.
Yes, Sue, but let's qualify that by saying if you do it, not when you do, because I take nothing for granted and it's totally fine. This is for colleagues, so I'm fine either way. Do we have results?
Just share the results.
Okay.
Just half the group, but
Awesome. Well, but Eve, I'll take somewhat too, and we'll see. And you're not, nobody will be put on the spot.
No.
No one's checking the homework. We will debrief it. So if you have a few minutes to just even mull it over. But honestly, if that bridge between treatment and outcome is practice. So if you do have a chance to practice even for a few minutes, you will get an exponential amount of value. With that said, the practice doesn't need to happen next week or even next month. It may be something that you plant a seed when the season is right. So thank you again for hosting me, Sue. You've been amazing. And colleagues, thank you for taking time out of your busy day. Can't wait to see you next Tuesday. You have a very good rest of the week. Stay warm and enjoy this beautiful Canadian winter.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Marilyn. It was great. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. See you on Tuesday.